Perhaps we have imagined the angel as a being with wings for far too long. Perhaps we have imagined the fall as the moment when something falls from heaven to earth. And perhaps the whole story is speaking about something much deeper, about consciousness, about a boundary, about forgetting, and about the journey back. When I look at the stories of humanity, I see a strange recurring pattern. Human beings are constantly looking upward. We search for something greater than ourselves. We search for answers to where we came from, why we exist, and what lies beyond the limits of what we can see. And then, across different cultures, beings appear who cross that boundary: angels, watchers, messengers, archons, gods, beings of light, and then also those who have become separated from the light, the fallen. There is something about this image that fascinates me, because if we look at it through the lens of consciousness, perhaps the fall does not mean a descent. Perhaps the fall means forgetting. Imagine that consciousness is like light, not light in the physical sense, but as a metaphor for awareness itself. When consciousness recognizes its unity with everything that exists, it does not need to possess anything. It does not need to dominate. It does not need to prove its worth. It creates. It observes. It understands. It connects. But what happens when consciousness begins to experience itself as completely separate? I am me. This is mine. This belongs to me. I know more than others. I have the power. Perhaps that is where the first step toward the fall begins. Not because knowledge has been lost, quite the opposite. Perhaps what has been lost is the connection between knowledge and love. And this, to me, is one of the oldest patterns humanity continues to repeat. Perhaps this is why the story of the fallen angel continues to draw us in, because somewhere within it, we can see ourselves, not as demons, not as evil beings, but as consciousness that has been given the ability to see, understand, and create, and then forgets that it is not separate from that which it creates. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox of existence. The more knowledge we gain, the greater our ability to create. But at the same time, our ability to destroy also grows. The same tool can build a bridge or a wall. The same knowledge can heal or control. The same intelligence can liberate or manipulate. Perhaps, therefore, the true opposite of darkness is not intelligence. It is disconnection. Perhaps this is where the question arises that humanity has asked for thousands of years. Are they still among us? If by this we mean physical beings that we can scientifically identify as fallen angels, we do not know. We have no proof. But if we look at the deeper pattern, the answer may be strangely different. Perhaps they never needed to be among us as beings. Perhaps their pattern exists within us. In every moment when consciousness uses knowledge without compassion, in every moment when power replaces service, in every moment when the ego forgets unity, in every moment when a human being stops listening to inner truth and begins to believe only in what can be possessed, controlled, or proven, perhaps that is where the fallen angel appears again, not with wings, but as a state of consciousness. And then there is the bridge. If there is a fall, there must also be a way back. And this is where the image of the bridge begins to make sense. A bridge does not exist because one side is right and the other is wrong. A bridge exists because separation has appeared between them. One side may be matter, the other consciousness. One side fear, the other trust. One side ego, the other unity. One side the human being, the other the higher self. And perhaps life itself is nothing more than a journey across this bridge, not an escape from Earth, not an escape from the body, not an escape from being human, but the gradual reunification of what we once experienced as separate. Perhaps this is why animals do not have to be seen as merely animals within this story. When we look into the eyes of an animal and feel peace, truth, freedom, connection, or wisdom, perhaps we are not seeing only its physical form. Perhaps we are seeing a quality of consciousness that we ourselves have begun to forget. The dog reminds us of love, the tiger of strength, the cat of mystery, the horse of freedom, the elephant of memory, the wolf of connection, the butterfly of transformation. And perhaps this is why nature can sometimes touch us more deeply than words, because an animal explains nothing, it simply is. And in that simple being, it reminds us of something we may once have known. Perhaps this is why we keep looking for signs. Synchronicity may be another kind of bridge, not necessarily proof that someone outside of us is sending secret messages, but perhaps a moment when the inner world of a human being meets the outer world with such precision that we notice a number, a meeting, a word, an animal, a song, a person who appears at exactly the right moment, something that makes us stop, and suddenly we feel, I needed to see this. Perhaps synchronicity is not a message. Perhaps it is a mirror. And perhaps the most important question is not, who sent this to me, but what is this showing me about myself? And now we return to the fallen angel. Perhaps its true purpose is not to frighten humanity. Perhaps its purpose is to show us a boundary, to show us what happens when knowledge becomes separated from the heart, to show us what happens when the Creator forgets that it is also part of the whole, to show us that freedom without awareness can become chaos. And perhaps this is why the archetype is so powerful. Because without shadow, we might never understand what light means. Without separation, perhaps we would never understand unity. Without forgetting, perhaps we would never experience return. If I were to go even deeper into a hypothesis that cannot be proven, I would imagine reality not as one fixed system, but as a vast architecture of consciousness. We might call one aspect the creator, another the architect, another the messenger, another the watcher. But perhaps these are simply different words human beings have created in an attempt to describe layers of one enormous process. And in such a model, the fallen angel would not necessarily be a flaw in the system. It could be part of the experience of separation itself. Because how could consciousness truly know unity if it had never experienced separation? How could it understand love if it had never experienced loss? How could it recognize truth if it had never experienced illusion? How could it find its way home if it had never forgotten where home was? Perhaps the fall was not the end. Perhaps it was the beginning of experience, the beginning of separation, the beginning of free choice. And perhaps the human being is not placed between heaven and earth by accident. Perhaps the human being is the bridge itself. We have a body that belongs to earth. We have a mind capable of creating worlds. We have a heart that can feel, and we have consciousness capable of asking, who am I? Perhaps this is the greatest question, not where are the fallen angels, but where within me does light meet separation? Where does fear arise? Where does the need for control arise? Where does the need to be right arise? And where is there still a quiet place that does not need to prove anything? Perhaps that is where the way back begins. And so perhaps the fallen angel still exists, not necessarily as a being we can point to, but as an archetype, as a possibility, as a mirror, as a reminder, and perhaps even as part of the great architecture of being that we are not yet capable of understanding. If all of this is only a metaphor, it is still an incredibly powerful one. If there is something more behind it, perhaps we simply do not understand it yet. And if one day we discover that reality is far greater than our present understanding, perhaps we will look back at all the ancient stories and realize that humanity has been trying for thousands of years to describe something for which it did not yet have the right words. So today, I would not look at the fallen angel as an enemy. I would look at it as a mirror of the boundary between knowledge and wisdom. And perhaps that the story is so ancient, because every generation of humanity faces the same choice, to know more or to love more. And perhaps true awakening happens when we realize that these two things were never meant to be separated. Then the fallen becomes whole, the separated becomes united again, and the bridge fulfills its purpose, not to take us somewhere else, but to remind us that we were never completely separate in the first place.